Welcome to Future Self Dreaming. My name is Carlos Kukulkan. So in the last presentation I shared some stories of a period of consciousness awakening and spiritual emergence in my early 20s that had guided me to explore an encounter with the morning star that I'd had as a child. This had synchronistically led me in the pursuit of studying the effects of sacred geometry and learning the activation of the Merkaba, otherwise known as the human light body. These events pushed me in the direction of becoming a facilitator of the body of work known as the ancient secret of the flower of life. And in this presentation, I wish to begin to share a series of initiations that occurred for me in the process of learning to facilitate these ancient Egyptian mystery school teachings. So over a couple of years before the next Flower of Life facilitator training, I attended two advanced trainings known as the Seed of Life 1 and the Seed of Life 2. The first of them, which was held in a small town called Chesterton, a couple of hours drive from Chicago. Now, these advanced trainings were facilitated by an amazing couple named Ronald Holt and Lisa Royale, who had taken over the Flower of Life organization from its original creator, Dronvelo Melchizedek, so that they could create an ambassador facilitator training. Now, when I'd booked my flights and travel arrangements to get to the workshop, there was a bus traveling from Chicago to about half an hour away from Chesterton, but no public transport from there. So initially I'd asked my higher self or my angelic guidance to sort this out, and when I arrived at the bus terminal there was nothing for me to do but put on my backpack, stick my thumb out and attempt to hitch a lift down the highway. Less than a minute later, a guy in an SUV pulls over, sticks his head out the window and is holding a fistful of money, to my surprise, and is asking me, do I need some cash? And I said to him, look, I didn't really need any money, but I needed a lift to this town called Chesterton. He said he wasn't going in that direction, but for me to jump in the car and he'd drive me a few miles down to the nearest gas station. He was a bit concerned that I might be in the wrong neighborhood, even though I was amongst paddocks full of cornfields. So I got to this gas station, got dropped off, asked the service station attendant how I might be able to get to Chesterton, and this truck driver that was in the gas station just said, where you're going, get in the truck, and he drove me right to where I needed to go. So it felt like everything had been kind of divinely orchestrated, perfectly aligned for me to get to my destination, and I soon thereafter found this bagel store, which was to become one of my favorite joints to dine at for the next week, and I laughed to myself about how easy it had been to get there, including being handed a fistful of cash for good measure. So that afternoon was the opening of our week-long workshop, and I met the facilitators Ron and Lisa for the first time, along with a co-facilitator named Tom, who had helped organize the event. My original Flower of Life facilitator Patricia described Ron as the walking heart chakra, and that was my initial impression of him. Lisa was radiating enthusiasm and excitement, and the co-facilitator and event organizer Tom, who described himself as a shaman, I didn't really like his energy much, and I knew that at some stage through the week we'd probably clash. Now, the participants had come from all over the world, and everyone had these crazy stories of their travels to get to the workshop that morning, such as mine. And the excitement and electricity of the atmosphere in this group was very tangible. Over the course of the next few days, we were involved in numerous activities. So each morning would begin with a Qigong class to clear blockages and build energy within our bodies for the work ahead. We reviewed a lot of information related to sacred geometry and the energy fields of the human body and the Merkaba. There were various practices that were done to create specific geometric fields around the body that would assist to release emotional blockages and clear old trauma out of our system. Now, I was really enthusiastic about all of the information and practices that were involved in, and I really enjoyed connecting with all of the other participants that were from all around the world, particularly of an evening at the conclusion of our workshops, when we would go to the motel's pool and jacuzzi and all sit there sharing stories and talk about metaphysical and spiritual nonsense before we went to bed. Now, Around day 4 or 5 in the afternoon, the lecturers gave us a talk about the way that our perceptions of reality change when our awareness is held at different levels of brain activity, and the role that the ego or our self-identity plays in these differing states. So we were shown that although we have many brainwave cycles functioning simultaneously, that our perception of reality and the energy in the universe is altered depending on which brainwave state our awareness is predominantly focused in at any given moment. Now, during what we consider our everyday waking consciousness, the focus of our attention is held in the beta brainwave state. And as our focus progressively moves downward through slower brainwave cycles and into deep unconscious sleep, we move from beta through alpha into theta and finally into delta when we're in deep unconscious sleep. Now, the states between waking consciousness and unconscious sleep we can access during meditation, when the mind is slowed, the body is relaxed, and we experience these states often slightly before or after sleep, and these states are often associated with heightened states of creativity or significant insight or revelation. So with this information in mind, a description of the nature of our waking ego mind was outlined, and it was explained to us that our ego self-identity mind tends to filter and distort our perception of reality to make it conform with our internal map of reality. The map that has been molded through our unconscious beliefs and values. Now, simple examples of the way that the mind can easily delete and distort reality can be found in visual experiments in the book called The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot. And we can also see how the brain deletes and distorts reality when we look at some of the amazing optical illusions available today that trick the brain. So what the mind sees and what is actually there can be vastly different, and these simple optical illusions are just a minute example in comparison to the way that the mind can alter our subjective experience of reality, particularly when it does not conform to our inner expectations. Another example that's often referenced is a story of Native Americans who could not see the ships of the Spanish when they arrived and invaded Mesoamerica. So they apparently, as the story goes, they could see these rowboats because the shape of the rowboats was similar to their own canoes. However, the huge sailing ships that were out in the ocean could not be seen because they were so foreign to the perception and worldview of these Native Americans. And it wasn't until some of the local shamans sat by the ocean for a period of days and allowed their perceptual state to adjust that they were able to see these large sailing ships and then explain to others what they were able to see, and then they were all able to adjust to that perception. So compared with the vast amount of information that the unconscious mind processes each moment, the conscious mind can only handle a very minute fraction of this information. In an attempt to maintain our self-identity, the ego, acting somewhat like a sphincter muscle, will only let into our perception that which conforms to the identity that we've created about ourselves and the perceptions of the reality that we experience. And many shamanic practices are designed to push a person beyond the island of their known reality into a sea of possibility and enter into an encounter with the unknown, into the mystery. So our facilitators continued to describe that after we had some detailed conversation on this topic, we were told a story that metaphorically outlined how the ego operates within what some people would describe as the third dimensional reality or physical reality, and how the mind struggles to comprehend and integrate much outside of this dimension of the known when we may enter the realm of spirit or all that's outside of physicality. So the story that our facilitators gave went a little bit like this. They asked us to imagine that our ego was like a king or a queen that resides within this grand castle, and to imagine that this castle is located within a mighty kingdom that's surrounded by these massive stone walls. And within this kingdom, along with many other villagers who play their various roles in the kingdom, you reside within this kingdom, within the walls. The king or the queen rules over this kingdom, imposing the laws that govern the society and everyone that resides within these walls. And to implement these laws, the king or the queen has an army which they dictate to. So within this kingdom, everyone is reasonably taken care of, and you've been told that nothing exists or resides beyond the walls of the kingdom. Now, this knowledge is taken as fact, and anybody who ever questions it, well, they never did, because they faced the fear of chastisement or ridicule from other people who opposed this common sense knowledge that nothing existed outside the walls of the kingdom. So one day during your lifetime, it so happened that as you were doing your work within a farming field within the kingdom, you're out ploughing the fields one day, and you happen to notice that there appears to be a small hole that's developed in the wall of the kingdom, and some rocks have corroded and fallen out, and you put down your work tools and walk over to inspect the damage. Now, as you approach this hole, you notice what appears to be movement on the other side of the wall. Now, having been told that there's nothing outside the walls of the kingdom, you're initially quite hesitant about this movement that you detect on the other side of the hole. However, there seems to be something within you that urges you to further inspect the hole. Now, the crack's just big enough for you to squeeze your head through, and you look out and see this sight before you that you realize there's a whole other kingdom outside here. Now, you've been told that nothing exists outside the walls of the kingdom, so seeing another world on the other side of these walls, you excitedly run off to the castle to visit the king or the queen in the castle, and you begin explaining to your majesty what you've witnessed, and they begin to quickly dismiss all that you report as absolute nonsense, claiming that it's a well-known fact that nothing exists outside the walls of the kingdom, and that you must have been hallucinating, or that you've got a very vivid imagination, or it must have been a trick of the light. And you come away from this experience feeling somewhat disillusioned by this explanation, and you return to your everyday life. The army is sent off to patch up the wall. Now, as time passes, the memory of what you'd seen begins to fade, until one day you're out strolling in the kingdom again, and you notice that there's another hole in the wall. Only this time it's large enough for you to wriggle your way through and stick your head through, and with great courage and curiosity, you reach the other side of the wall and view this other kingdom on the other side. And again, excitedly, you return to the king or the queen in the castle and begin to explain your experience to them. And once again, they try to tell you that this must be all a figment of your imagination, a trick of the light, some sort of hallucination. However, this time you've experienced directly this other world, this other kingdom that exists on the other side of the walls, and you're fueled by the conviction of your experience. So the king or the queen then begin to try to gain your trust by confiding in you that actually there is indeed something on the other side of those walls, but those walls have been created for the safety of everybody in the kingdom, and that they're there because there's all types of atrocities, grotesque beings who would eat small babies, and that they've been built to protect you and keep you safe. And they tell you that it's in everybody's best interest to stay within the confines of the walls of the kingdom. Now, that hasn't been your experience when you have put your head through the other side and you've just seen this magical land that you've wanted to go and adventure. And this time you're not buying the story of the king or the queen in the castle that have tried to dismiss and deny and fill you with fear about this other kingdom outside the walls. So, at the conclusion of this story that our facilitators Ron and Lisa gave, they began to dress up in costume with the other co-facilitator Tom, and they began to perform a pantomime version of the story that we've just been told. And they were dressed in medieval style costumes, and following this basic outline of the story, they ad-libbed their way through, and it was very humorous. We all had a good laugh. Now, there were a couple of points during this pantomime that I found myself triggered due to these slightly unusual occurrences that I was a bit confronted by, that were partly done by the co-facilitator Tom, who was taking these pot shots at me in the audience. And again, I was emotionally triggered by this, and I pondered Tom's intention of doing so, and then I considered that he was just infuriating my ego by insulting my sense of self. I'd noticed that in the days prior, he occasionally would take somebody off for a private chat, and generally they'd come back quite disgruntled from this encounter. So I could see that he was kind of disturbing people. And although I was aware that this was the role he was playing, either consciously or unconsciously, to both myself and others who'd individually taken aside during the week, I was still wary of his intentions, and had difficulty shaking off the effects of his comments. So after this performance, Ron and Lisa explained that we would be breaking for dinner, and on our return after dinner we would be participating in an ancient ritual meditation practice. So we all went out, had a lovely dinner together, and we came back for the last part of that evening. Now, Ron and Lisa explained that we were going to be participating in a group meditation, and that the meditation wouldn't be guided throughout, that the instructions were as followed, that we, during this meditation, we needed to focus all our attention and focus on a point just below our belly button, known as the dantian or donjon, in the lower abdomen. And for the entire duration of this exercise, we just needed to maintain this focus on a flame that was burning inside our abdomen. And that part of the process was that any time anything distracted us, whether it was our internal thoughts or feelings or anything external, we just had to acknowledge it and bring our awareness back to this flame. Now, we were instructed that we could wear these eye masks. We'd lay down on the floor with our head on a pillow. We had an altar in the middle of the group, and so our feet were all facing this altar. And as we were getting ourselves prepared and comfortable, they began to put on some gentle waterfall music on a CD. Now, they explained that it was also essential throughout this process that we stayed awake for the duration and lie extremely still without moving our body. And Lisa explained that they knew this might be difficult to lay down and stay conscious after we just had a delicious meal and were perhaps feeling drowsy, but that if anybody did happen to fall asleep and they noticed, they were just going to gently come around the circle and wake us up so that we could continue the process. So after everyone had got settled for the meditation, I felt this intense determination that I was not going to fall asleep, and a superior will that I was going to stay focused on this inner flame the entire time. So I was quite a young buck at the time and filled with this determination. So that's how I began the meditation. Now, what seemed like perhaps the first 10 minutes or so, my vigilance in watching this inner flame was excellent, and I rarely became distracted by any thoughts in the back of my mind or any external distractions. Now, as we got further into the meditation and I began to relax more, my body and my mind began to relax from this extreme focus that I'd been in, the distractions of my mind seemed to be getting more intense and louder and louder. In particular, the voice in my mind alerting me to the fact that my bladder was full and I needed to go to the toilet. Now, even after having relieved myself after dinner, before this meditation, I was finding I drank a lot of water during dinner and my bladder was at the point of explosion. And the more full that my bladder got, the more my internal dialogue grew out of control. And the thoughts that were racing through my head just began to be fueled by this intense anger that was going on in my body. And the types of thinking that I was going on with were blaming the facilitators, thinking, why the hell didn't Ron and Lisa tell me we're going to do this meditation practice before we went out for dinner and I drank 5 glasses of water? And my mind just began to curse them out. And on top of that, the waterfall music that they were playing wasn't helping, and it was like a form of water torture. But in my determination to stay focused on this meditation, this other part of my mind just came in, calming me down, saying, just stay focused on the flame. This is all just a distraction. Your bladder's just a distraction. This anger's a distraction. And would continue to bring my focus back to this inner flame. So it was like there was this conflict going on in my mind, these two voices. One of them very loud and angry, saying, this is bullshit, I didn't sign up for this crap, like I can go to the toilet if I want to. The other part of my mind gently just saying, return to presence, return to this flame, and just calming me down. So this battle went on for the next 15 minutes or so. And between these two parts of my mind, eventually this anger that I was feeling in my body started to calm down. I still needed to go to the toilet, but it wasn't as intense. And the other part of my mind just continued to soothe me and say, just stay with the process, just stay focusing on this flame. Now, after another period of time went by, I started to notice some distraction from around the circle. And began to notice that one of the facilitators was beginning to just gently, slowly walk around the outside periphery of the group. And I thought somebody must have gone to sleep. And anyway, my mind was saying, this is just a distraction, just continue to return to this flame. As the facilitator walked around the circle, they began to get behind me, and they stood there and stopped. And after a moment, they began to squat down, and they put their hands on the pillow either side of my head, and my head tilted back as the pillow went down. And I began to think to myself, oh, okay, they must have thought that I've gone to sleep because I look so relaxed. I haven't moved at all the whole period of this meditation. My ego gave myself a little pat on the shoulder for being so good at the process. But this other part of my mind just continued to direct me back to this focus on this flame. So don't be distracted. This is just another distraction. So continued to focus on this flame. But after a couple of minutes went by, I noticed that they were still there. My head was still tilted back where their hands were on this pillow. And I began to wonder, what the hell are they still doing there? It's been a couple of minutes. They haven't said anything to me. The other part of my mind is just saying, this is just a distraction. Just keep bringing your focus back to this flame. And then some part of me was thinking, no, this isn't right. They would have told me to wake up. And then another voice enters my awareness, a much calmer yet more powerful and all-knowing voice that just says to me, it's not them. And at that point, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that it was not one of the facilitators that was standing behind me. This other part of my mind is thinking, well, if it's not them, who the hell is it? And I'm starting to really question what was going on. And the calmer part of my mind is just continuing to say to me, don't be distracted by this. Just bring your focus back to this flame. So I continued to do that. And as I did, the hands gently came up from behind my head lifted back up on the pillow, and they began to walk around the circle again. Now, I continued to stay very focused on this flame. And a couple of minutes went by, and I began to notice them walking back around the opposite direction of the circle. And again, when they got behind me, they stopped, and they began to squat down again behind me, put their hands on the pillow, my head tilted back on the pillow, and I began to think, oh, this is really weird. Like, I felt really strange. There was a lightness in my body. My mind was torn. Because it could not answer this question of what was going on, who this was, and what they were doing there, while the other part of my mind was continuing to stay focused on this flame. Now, about 30 seconds or so went by. The hands began to slightly raise off the pillow again. Nothing had been spoken to me. My head tilted back up on the pillow, and they began to gently walk around the circle again. Now, my mind was struggling to comprehend what was happening, and I was just maintaining awareness, just maintaining consciousness, and my mind is continuing to bring my focus to stay focused back on this flame. Now, I felt like I was on some type of strange drug, and even though I'd been sober for many years and never taken a psychedelic compound in my life other than cannabis as a teenager, I felt like I was on drugs in this very altered state. But I was continuing to maintain my focus on this flame and continuing to stay conscious. Well, another 20 minutes or so went past, and with a lot more internal dialogue, progressively I became less focused on this flame, and eventually my full bladder got the better of me. I didn't know how long the meditation was going to continue for, so I got up and had to go to the toilet. So I came back from the toilet, tiptoed my way back in, rejoined the group, and for about another 10 minutes or so, the meditation continued. I didn't particularly get very deep with it, but at the conclusion of that, they began to bring us out of the meditation, and the facilitators explained that that wasn't the end of the process, that we were now going to stand up and form a circle, and that we were going to continue this process by walking this path around the circle and allowing our body to move down through our ancestral lineage and timeline. Now, I was, by this stage of the evening, completely done with this process. I didn't want to participate or continue, and my internal dialogue had completely taken over, and my mind was out of control again. And I'm doing the process, but I wasn't really that engaged in it. I'm listening to my mind that's just thinking, I don't want to do this crap. I'm too tired. Let's get out of here. I just want to go to the jacuzzi and sit in there and talk spiritual nonsense for the rest of the night. And the more that my mind resisted this process, the longer it seemed to be drawn out. And I was looking at everybody else in the group, some of them, morphing into ape-like beasts of different things going on in the body, and I'm just thinking, God, I gotta get away from these fucking new age hippies and get the fuck out of here. Anyway, we continued this process to its completion for about another 20 minutes or so, and I'm thinking, great, let's get out of here, let's go and hit the jacuzzi. And to make the situation worse, at the end of it, the facilitators brought out this box full of bandanas, and they said to us, now, anyone who wants to deepen this process can do so by staying in silence for the rest of the group, for the rest of the evening rather, and this will signify to the group that you're going to stay in silence until we return for our next part of the class tomorrow morning after breakfast. And I was thinking to myself, there's no way I'm taking one of those bandanas with me. I'm getting in that jacuzzi and we're going to talk spiritual nonsense. But by default, everybody else took a bandana, and I was left in silence for the rest of the night. Now, I did go to the jacuzzi. Everybody else kind of took off to their rooms or wherever they're staying for the evening to stay in silence. A couple of my friends came and joined me in the jacuzzi, even though they decided to stay in silence, and I was playing the biggest devil's advocate. My king or queen in my mind, my ego had completely taken control, and I thought, right, well, if they aren't going to talk, I'll make them laugh. And so I continued to go on with nonsense, trying to an egotistic behavior, trying to make them laugh. Eventually, we had an early night. Everyone returned to their room. Now, one of the guys, the two other guys that I was sharing my room with, had decided to go and camp by a lake for the evening. So when I got back, my other flatmate was already in bed, and I snuck into the room in darkness, and I lay in bed, and I began to have the most mind-blowing experience. As soon as I lay down, I became aware that I was in two places at the same time, and my mind just could not comprehend this encounter. As I drifted off to sleep, I was thinking, this is impossible. How can I be in two places at once? And where am I? What am I encountering here? And I fell asleep. Now, I woke up about half a dozen times during the evening, still completely aware that I was split, that I was in two places. And it wasn't until the next morning that I actually woke up. My other flatmate had already left while I was asleep, and I woke up and I dragged myself into the shower and got some water on my body and began to solidify my awareness just being back in one place. And I got dressed and began to make my way towards the bagel store where I'd been having breakfast every morning. And as I was walking across this field towards the bagel store, I began to have this extreme overwhelm and anxiety, becoming quite distressed, because I started to remember all the experiences that I had had the night before during the meditation practice, and being in two places for about 8 hours, and this panic attack began to come over me, and this sensation that I'd completely lost grip on reality. My mind started kicking in, saying, right, there's a history of schizophrenia in the family, it's got you, and you've lost your marbles. And I began to reason with myself, saying, okay, just breathe, get it together, okay, I'm in America, I'm going mad, I need some help. So I made a beeline for where I thought the facilitators, Ron and Lisa, would be. And sure enough, as I was walking through this hotel, they popped out of this door in front of me, and I grabbed them, and I began to explain what was going on frantically to them. And as I explained what I'd experienced that evening, they were there just gently nodding and smiling, grinning at me. And as I looked at them, I knew that it wasn't a grin of trickery, but one of empathy with my experience. And as they listened, they began to explain to me. They said, this keeps happening with you young ones. You keep jumping ahead of the work that we're leading up to. And I said to them, what do you mean, the work that we're leading up to? Where is it that we're heading? And they said, well, we're leading up to what we do that's called contact work. And they began to explain that contact work was where we would activate our Merkaba field and interact with what some people might call extraterrestrials or angels, and they like to refer to them as interdimensional beings. And all of a sudden, I was calm. I was thinking to myself, oh, this is cool. This is, not my everyday experience, but I've read all these channeled books and material about extraterrestrials and whatnot. I haven't had much experience with it. But I felt like, okay, yeah, this is my thing. Totally fine. Cool. So I took off to the bagel store where I was having breakfast, ordered myself some food, sat there initially feeling nice and calm, and then all of a sudden these huge waves of anxiety and paranoia begin coming over me, and my mind starts going crazy and starts going, okay, no, this is all a trick. They've set you up with some NLP style story last night that's messed with your perception of reality, and they're playing a trick on you. And there's this other part of my mind, the much quieter, calmer part of my mind, that's just gently saying to me, it's all right, Carlos, you know what you've experienced, just breathe, you're going to be okay. And so I went back to the workshop that morning, and we all sat in a group, and I started to realize that these interdimensional experiences were actually very normal, and that our mind is often blocking out the types of encounters that we have with non-ordinary reality. And as the workshop progressed and everybody made their way back and out of silence that morning, everybody had these quite unusual encounters to share. And of course, the king of my ego needed to ask the question, needed to ask, look, I said, I understand what I've experienced, and I know what has happened last night in reality, but my mind is trying to trick me. But I just had to ask, did anybody come around the circle that night? And of course, nobody had gotten up and come around the circle. They were aware that there had been some other interdimensional activity going on in the room. And I came to accept that had been my experience, a very intense experience with non-ordinary reality, and one that would continue to unfold for me in the years afterwards. So Ron and Lisa also began to explain that they'd been doing that work for some time, and they understood what happened for people when the walls of their kingdom began to come crashing down. And they reassured me that the king or the queen struggles to maintain control of our perception of reality, and that oftentimes when they're running these workshops leading up to this interdimensional interdimensional contact, is that they start to notice what they have termed signature behavior, and the group began to ask what this signature behavior was, and Ron and Lisa began to explain that as our energy fields, the electromagnetic fields of our being, our consciousness, begin to interact and merge with other electromagnetic fields and levels of consciousness, that all sorts of strange behavior begins to arise in people. Now, particularly as our ego might try to control its grip on its perception of reality, and this can become quite overwhelming for people. And some people experience tiredness, maybe associated with the decrease in brainwave activity. Some people become very hyperactive and fidgety, as though they've drunk a lot of red cordial. And there's various other mood swings and things. People might become irritable or angry, and for other people, they just have to go completely unconscious. They can't handle the interaction that they're having consciously, and so they have to go to sleep and go into the unconscious mind to be able to have this interdimensional interaction. So over the next few days, the concept of signature behavior began to become a running joke amongst the workshop participants, as we began to notice what was going on for people as their behavior would become quite erratic at times. And we also noticed that as we were starting to create a group energy field or a group Merkaba, that there was usually a person in the group that would do what became affectionately known as delta duty, which was they would have to fall asleep because they needed to hold the delta brainwave frequency for the rest of the group, as we were struggling to maintain conscious awareness while these interactions were going on. Now, little did I know at the time, but Lisa was a trance channel for Pleiadian consciousness and had compiled a series of books, one of them being called The Prism of Lyra, which is about humanity's extraterrestrial origins, and another one that was called Preparing for Contact, which was largely about the work that we were doing in this advanced flower of life training called the Seed of Life. And Preparing for Contact sort of outlined some of the work that Ron and Lisa had been involved in, following on from the original work of an organization that you may have heard of called SETI, which is the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which became popularized perhaps by the work of Carl Sagan in one of his books that later became one of my favorite movies, starring Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey, called Contact. And the work of the originators of SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, had diverged from attempting to make contact with other life forms via technological means into the exploration of doing so through consciousness. So as this workshop continued over the following days, as you can imagine, it was filled with more bizarre, mind-bending experiences. And as the last days of that workshop unfolded, it began to seem that piloting a biological interdimensional spacecraft known as the Merkaba was actually child's play, and that traveling down wormholes in space and time to meet interdimensional beings was a totally natural human experience. And that perhaps I'd also completely cracked and lost my mind, and that was just fine by me. So this has been a sharing of my journey towards becoming a facilitator of the ancient secret of the flower of life. In the next presentation, I'll continue to share some of the events that occurred for me in the following weeks after this initial Seed of Life training, when I traveled to Egypt and had my reality model further dismantled. And in future presentations, I'll expand further on my understanding of what occurred and detail these in future presentations. So if you'd like to continue this journey with me in more episodes of Future Self Dreaming, please hit the subscribe button, and you can check out offerings on the website futureselfdreaming.com and follow Future Self Dreaming on Instagram and Facebook. Thank you, in Lakesh.